Each season, summer, fall, and winter, spring, the Loft schedules a huge variety of writing classes. Today, I'm thrilled to introduce one of our longtime teaching artists, Jack Elhai. Jack, could you introduce yourself and tell us how you got involved at the Loft?
Happy to, and thanks for having me here, Savannah. It's great to be here talking about these things. Um, I first became involved with the Loft a very long time ago as a Loft student during the 1980s when I was just learning how to write and trying to figure out what my interests were in writing. And so I took a variety of fiction and nonfiction classes then. And then I was fortunate enough to be to benefit from some of the Loft's other programs. I was in the Loft's Mentor series as a mentee and a creative nonfiction program that was going on at the time, and then became a Loft McKnight Fellowship winner also during the 1990s. And then I began teaching at the Loft, probably in the late 90s or a few years after that. I've taught courses in writing about history, which is one thing that I've done a lot of in my own writing work. I've taught about developing story ideas, which is one of my pet enthusiasms. And I've probably taught other topics as well. And then I've also served on the Loft board. I was on the Loft board for a number of years up until a few years ago. So the Loft has been with me all the way through my writing career, and it's been a really important part of helping me develop as a writer.
Well, I'm glad you brought up your own writing. My cat's going to join us for a bit, otherwise she'll meow during this whole thing. Um, because I was hoping you could talk a little bit more about this. You said you've taken classes in fiction and nonfiction, and your books are either like very heavily nonfiction or they pull from nonfiction practices. Um, and I know for a lot of people, writing nonfiction can seem like more work, really, maybe than writing. And so, especially when you're talking about getting newer writers or maybe people who don't have a background in writing to come in and teaching fiction and nonfiction courses, how do you make that accessible for them?
That's funny because I consider fiction writing to be more work than writing nonfiction. Um, and it's simply because for me to invent everything or almost everything demands a lot of me that I'm not used to doing. And so, as a nonfiction writer, what I'm trying to do is to take things that have happened in the world and to find a voice to tell that story in and to shape them into stories and to find a structure, a lot of the things that fiction writers do actually, and create a narrative. And I think probably what inhibits a lot of people from writing nonfiction is their perception that they've got to get everything right. You can't make a mistake. There's tons of research involved. And then I think many people believe that whatever it is you write from all this has to fall into some narrowly prescribed format. And that especially is not true. A work of nonfiction can read like anything. It can be in first person, second person, third person, omniscient narrator, whatever you want. When I talk to and teach nonfiction writers, I try to impress on them that yes, everything they write has to have happened. Um, there's no fictionalizing that should be happening in nonfiction, except the voice of the narrator. And that can be whatever you want it to be, whatever will effectively tell the story. So there are a lot of possibilities in how to tell a nonfiction story, how to build it, how to approach it. And that to me is the most fun part of writing nonfiction. And I hope I'm successful in communicating that to the students who have taken my classes.
I'm going to take what might seem like a little bit of a turn, but it'll all come back together. Could you also talk about your experience working in the healthcare field?
Well, There are two branches to that. One is that I've written a lot of medically related works. I've written a lot about the history of medicine, and I've written a lot about contemporary medicine as well. All of that has been nonfiction. And my first real work in that area was a book I did back in 2005 called The Lobotomist. And it was a biography of Walter Freeman, a physician who championed and developed lobotomy as a now discredited, but then very much credited treatment for people suffering from all kinds of psychiatric disorders, ranging from depression and anxiety to schizophrenia and all kinds of other things that it was applied to. And then I did write another book after that about another psychiatrist named Douglas Kelly, who was involved in the treatment and evaluation of the top Nazi war criminals at the Nuremberg trial, the first Nuremberg trial. But then the other branch of my involvement with healthcare is that for many years now, I've been teaching workshops and individually coaching also people who work in healthcare on their writing, and emphasizing creative writing. So nonfiction forms like memoir and essay, fiction, short stories, novels, even performed works like scripts, podcasts, poetry occasionally too. And I got into that through my book writing because some years ago, when I was giving a presentation at a medical conference about my book, The Lobotomist, I was approached by a neurosurgeon afterwards who told me, thanks for your talk. I would like to write a book like that someday. And fortunately, so fortunately, I stifled the impulse to be a smart aleck and say, yeah, and I'd like to perform brain surgery too. But I didn't say that, and I did give him some suggestions, but it got me thinking, especially after more people in healthcare approached me after similar talks, that I should develop a some kind of workshop or program for them. And I started doing that first through the University of Minnesota's continuing education, and then through the Mayo Clinic. And then I recently, during the COVID pandemic, began coaching people virtually online.
And that's what you're teaching this summer is so creative writing for healthcare professionals as a class. And I mean, given the past couple of years for healthcare professionals who have just been absolutely pushed to the maximum, have been facing some, I mean, very, very traumatizing work times. What do you see as really the primary benefit of putting some of that experience down on paper?
I don't know if there is a primary benefit because it varies a lot from person to person. But there are a whole set of different categories of benefits. And one, of course, is what you just referred to, that many people in healthcare right now are working under a lot of stress and burnout, and anxiety about their futures and their careers, all that. And any kind of artistic expression is valuable in relieving that kind of stress, whether it's writing or playing a musical instrument or painting, whatever. What is great about writing, though, compared to some of those other forms of artistic expression, is that anybody can do it with very little, nothing almost, in the way of equipment. And all that's needed is effort, and there's much of that that's required. But any kind of expression like that, through writing, through keeping a journal of writing, or trying to work on dedicated pieces, will relieve stress and burnout for people working in healthcare. But then there's a whole nother set of benefits, and these long predate the pandemic, and it's that people who write become more curious, more empathetic, and um, and those qualities will help them with their patients if they work with patients and with their colleagues. And so it'll make them even better as people working in healthcare than if they hadn't started writing. And then I also believe that putting yourself in the shoes, taking the perspective of all kinds of people, um, which you often do in your writing, is going to help you as a human being, not just as a healthcare worker. And there's that benefit as well. A lot of the writers who I've worked with do not necessarily want to publish. Um, and it's not the point for many of them. They're trying to get these other benefits, many of which, all of which come to you, whether you publish or not. And then there are some who do want to publish, and I like working with them as well too. But and there are a whole host of other benefits to publishing for people in healthcare that they share with anybody that probably come up in all sorts of Loft classes.
And especially for students who might be interested in publishing, but even those who aren't, how would you talk to them about either like the guilt or the discomfort or that sort of nagging feeling that they might be breaking some of their clients' confidentiality, or that they might be sort of like taking their stories as their own?
Hmm. Yeah, that's a big consideration for a lot of people in healthcare who go into writing. They're worried about the ethics of writing about patients or others who they have come into contact with. Um, However, so there are ways to talk about that and to get around it. After all, Oliver Sacks built a writing career about writing about patients, and was able to do that not only without apparent problem from his patients, but also very successfully in the sense that he was able to give readers empathy for the patients and use the patient's experience as a portal into the wider world. So, it's possible to work around the moral and ethical problems. As for the other point you just raised about taking other people's stories, it doesn't have to be about other people's stories. It can be about the writer's story and the writer's interactions with other people and the writer's experiences and the writer's reactions to other people. That's your own story, no matter who you're encountering. And that's open to all healthcare people who work in healthcare who decide to write.
And so currently, I'm struggling with a lot of long COVID issues. And one of the things I worry about whenever anyone asks, or, they ask about an interview or for me to write something about it, is the fatigue that comes along with what sort of like political, clapback you're going to get for something like that. And you've obviously written books that have really heavy ties into politics. So for students who they really want to write about their experience dealing with COVID, but they really don't want to open that door to people who maybe don't believe it's happening or who don't believe in vaccinations or things like that. How do you ease some of that tension for students?
Um, I don't mean to be flip, but in a very simple way by urging these students to write for themselves. They're not writing for people who are against vaccines. They're not writing for people in other categories who might be critical of what they're writing. They're writing to benefit themselves and to benefit readers who might be like themselves or might someday become like themselves. So I'm not a proponent of thinking a lot about your audience in that sense as you're writing. It's about you and what you choose to write about and what you choose to express and focus on. Now, I don't want at all to diminish the feelings that people have when they're writing on any kind of topic that that raises the possibility of criticism from the outside. But thinking about that too much as you're writing is a little bit like thinking about uh, whether what you're writing will make your book or your piece a bestseller or not, or go viral or not. It's um, it's not productive, and it won't help your book or article or piece go viral or become a bestseller. To focus on that. So focus on the immediate, focus on yourself, focus on what's around you, and I think in time things will work out.
You mentioned that, for your students, what you really want is for them to have a like space on a page for them to work through their experiences, for some of their thoughts and feelings. But apart from that, what do you hope every student is going to take away? Maybe something a little bit more tangible in terms of craft or skill.
Um, well, since many of these healthcare students come to me being already pressed and stressed because of the demands on their time, um, a lot of them are worried about, will I be able to find time to do this? How can I find time to do this? And I like to tell the story of the poet and physician William Carlos Williams, who often wrote while he was working and wrote in 5 to 10 minute chunks. And so if you write for 10 minutes, squeezed in between a bunch of other things that you're doing, that's writing. Writing for 5 minutes is writing, and it all adds up into, over time, into a significant chunk of writing. And the way that you can do that and be productive is to always have with you something to write on or write with, whether it's a notebook pad or an electronic device that you can take notes or even dictate notes to. Just don't wait for the moment when you can sit down at a desk and have 3 hours of leisure in front of you. For many people, that's not going to happen, but it doesn't have to happen. So that's one thing that I hope people will take away from our time together.
And then one of my final questions, I was just hoping you could talk on what students gain from either being in person or virtual, but making the investment to actually have a class time and instructed writing versus maybe just looking up generative exercises online.
I've noticed that in the workshops I've taught to healthcare professionals, especially if they're live, but or in person, but sometimes if they're virtual, um, the fact that all of these people work do the same kind of work or in the same line of business, um, gives them a lot of points in common. And it's a different quality that I feel in the classroom than if I'm teaching just a miscellaneous group of people who have gotten together because of the topic. And I really like that. And I like the vibe that I have seen in in-person workshops like the one we're having this summer for healthcare professionals. And these groups have mixed physicians with nurses, dentists, occupational therapists, physical therapists, um, psychologists, and other therapists of different kinds, dentists. I've had medical transcriptionists, people who work in all areas of healthcare. And even though their professions are so varied, the fact that they're all working in healthcare does give them a kind of bond that's really fun to see, and fun to see that connection take place.
All right. Well, my final question for you is a little bit more of a personal question, so people get to know you a little bit better. Obviously, you're extremely busy writing and teaching and leading workshops, but when you aren't doing any of that, what's your favorite way to spend your time?
Well, it may be a hackneyed answer, but I love spending time with my family. My wife and I have two daughters who are now in their 20s, and they both are right now living in the Twin Cities. And it's great to have them around and to develop a new kind of relationship with them, with everybody being an adult, as long as I can keep up that pretense anyway. And so that's really a wonderful thing. And also, looking at other forms of artistic expression, I love music and I play music, and I have a ever-growing collection of fretted instruments, guitars, and mandolins that I like to spend time with. They're also good friends of mine that all have stories behind them, and that's another way that I can express myself and have some fun.
Right, well, thank you very much for coming in and chatting with me today, Jack. For our viewers and listeners, if you want to find Jack's classes as well as the rest of our lineup, you can go to loft.org/classes. Would highly recommend checking out Jack's class either this summer or in the future. Again, thank you for taking the time to be here with me.
My pleasure. Thank you, Savannah, for your great questions.